There's nothing more satisfying than one of your favorite artistic mediums supporting a social movement with good representation. It's important for queer representation to be all around the world, in movies and shows alike, but it's even more important for audiences to know when the representation is good and separate it from the bad. Good representation is making use of and empowering the queer characters a work of media elects to represent, having a reason for those characters being queer and serving a purpose. Bad representation is putting a queer character in for the sake of having one, without good will for including them, or, at worst, exploiting them as the butt of a joke. I'd like to look at how queer rep is portrayed in animation. From the first queer animated character in 1989 to the dozens of queer shows seen on streaming services today, animation is a great pathway for millions of all ages to see representation in. And to be clear, I don't think any of the following 6 examples are explicitly bad. Any queer representation that doesn't actively work against the queer community is good and positive, and I love to see it. These are more of my thoughts on fixing them towards making them work better within the stories that they're telling. Disney and Pixar have been the frontrunners for animated movies of the last 10 or 20 years, and it isn't even close. 10 of the 15 highest grossing animated films of all time have come from these 2 studios, so it's a big deal when queer representation is included in one of their movies. Pixar is notoriously a little more daring when it comes to pushing the boundaries of what animation can offer, which makes it a little sad to say that 2022's Lightyear has some bad queer representation. The queer character in question, Alicia, was established to be queer in a couple scenes, but her love interest is completely silent and has no lines. The infamous kissing scene would have been even more groundbreaking if we knew anything about this character beforehand. The character serves its role for the story, but the representation comes secondary to it, mainly so the footage can be removed for the China and Saudi Arabia releases. Disney, on the other hand, strangely had more tasteful queer representation from within the same year. Strange World wasn't a movie too many people saw in theaters, but it might have the best queer representation in any of the official animation studio's 62 film output. The character of Ethan serves as an example of how to actually write a queer character in animation, including his blossoming crush on a male side character in numerous scenes instead of just one. The queer character trait doesn't define him, but it serves as just another detail for the character to have. I'm sad this movie underperformed because representation like this is essential for young audiences to see, even if the lack of marketing the movie got could have been a result of the main queer character. While the mainstream studios are on the way to finding good representative roots, let's take a look at where animation's first gay character came from, stop motion. Laika Studios was the first one to include an out main character in an animated movie ever, making this a groundbreaking inclusion to the 2012 film Paranorman. The featured character, Mitch, is a great example of good representation, for the most part. Mitch joins the main group of kids surviving a zombie attack, and his role in the story is being drooled over by Norman's sister Courtney. When the movie's almost over, Mitch drops the line,
"Sounds great, Kathy. You know, you're gonna love my boyfriend. He's like a total chick flick nut."
A funny as hell joke that made the character extremely more memorable and didn't detriment the character. So what's the problem, really? It's the last line he says before the movie ends. The thing people will walk out of the theater and forever associate with Mitch is that he is the gay character from Paranorman 2012. Mitch is around for the entire movie, so revealing that he's gay a little earlier on gives him time to shine in other places before the movie's over, and not just the gay one. I love Mitch. He's pretty handily the best character in Paranorman, and I don't think this is bad representation, but if this was the first queer lead in any animated movie, I just would have liked a little more from him. There's another recent stop-motion movie to implement a queer lead, 2022's Wendell Wild from Netflix. This story centers around an outcast girl named Kat as she navigates a boarding school before the titular demons are set loose. Her only real friend is Raul, a fellow boarding school student who is revealed to be outcasted too. Not for being a new kid, but for being transgender. Raul is revealed to be trans early on, with subtle aggressions from the girls bullying Kat in their introductory scenes. He even gets to serve a bigger role in the story, being a central player with other character traits like his painting and his compassion. He's an actual person, not just his queer identity. He's a great example of how to include a queer character that enhances the story, and while I enjoy watching Mitch during his zombie antics, Raul is definitely better in terms of a powerful queer character in an animated movie. This all leads to the most prominent category of our discussion today, animated television series. The list goes on for shows that include queer characters, so I'll talk about the two biggest of the bunch. Those being Adventure Time and The Legend of Korra, one of the most popular series from Cartoon Network and Nickelodeon respectively. The Legend of Korra concludes with the characters Korra and Asami walking into the spirit realm after the main villain is defeated in the series' final battle, and they lock eyes for the final shot of the series. This was the first implied queer relationship in any animated series, even before something as explicitly queer as Steven Universe. While it was groundbreaking, I'm sorry to say that it wasn't well built up to, and it wasn't as powerful as it should have been. My main issue is that Korra and Asami were caught in a separate love triangle for a lot of the series, and it didn't give them much time to develop as a couple. They do have a pinch of scenes together, but for most of the final season, Korra and Asami don't interact. Given that they have a 3-year time skip where they are separated between the events of the previous season, it's hard to think of any obscure potential feelings that they had for each other would have survived. It isn't a bad way to end the series, but if these writers and animators were smart enough to develop nearly every character in Avatar: The Last Airbender, Korra's predecessor series, it feels a little cheap that they couldn't develop the main character of the series that came after it. In Avatar, the preteen romance came as a sidestep to a grander story of taking down the Fire Nation, but in Korra's young adult angst, with most of the series containing some romantic melodrama, it feels bad that the conclusory romance wasn't entirely satisfying. Thankfully, the same thing can't be said about the creative team of Adventure Time. Princess Bubblegum and Marceline, the Vampire Queen, are the couple characters in this series, and they're established as a couple in the final episode of the entire show. So why is this couple better than Korra? These two characters have had multiple entire episodes dedicated to them as a pair across the series' total 283 episodes, tracing back through season 3 up to season 10. Plus, they have even more development in the prequel series Distant Lands and the sequel series Fiona and Cake. They're implied to have been friends not just for 3 years, but for 1,000, making plenty of time for friendship to bloom and for feelings to develop. They have about 10 years worth of defining character traits outside of being queer, and the fact that they get together romantically at the end of the story is the cherry on top of their emotional journeys through the series that brought the world so many laughs and so many adventures. And of course, they actually kiss. Hell yes. Animation as a whole is headed in a good direction when it comes to queer representation, with shows and movies putting out better and better examples of how to write good queer characters, and I'm eager to see more. We've learned from the past, and hopefully will continue to get even better as time goes on.